We are approaching winter very quickly, and a lot of questions I'm getting are asking about what to grow in the winter, what works best, and how can you keep making money during the winter months when there's not as much production coming off the field. So that's exactly what I'm going to talk to you guys about today. 5 crops, and they're not necessarily all crops that I grow anymore, but they're crops I have a lot of experience with growing, and it's kind of based on a lot of the farmers that I know and what they do during the winter. So we're going to look at these 5 crops, talk about some of the techniques and things that we can do to keep production up during the winter and keep the money coming in. Okay, I want to go through these 5 crops first, and then I'll talk more about their nuances and how you can market them. So number 1, I find overall the hundreds of farms I've visited throughout the world, particularly ones that have winters. So this is important to understand. So we're not talking about the tropics here. We're talking about climates that have winters. Number 1 is spinach. That is the best money-making crop I've seen in all the years of farming that I've had. It is the most consistent crop used by the most amount of farmers during the winter and delivers the most consistent results. It's also a relatively high-value crop. It can handle really cold weather very well, better than most other crops that I know of. So spinach is absolutely number 1. Number 2 would be green kale. So green frilly kale. Other types of kale will work too. And I'm not talking about baby kale, I'm talking about big kale, like the kind I have in my garden. Big stalks. The whole idea with the kale is that you want to have it well established. You want to have big plants before you go into winter, and that kale can even be under snow. I've harvested kale in the snow. If you don't believe me, go back in my videos last winter. I did exactly that. Number 3 is carrots. So carrots aren't necessarily a crop that grows during the winter, and actually all of these don't really grow in the winter per se, except for the next one I'm going to tell you about. It's really about establishing them. But carrots, the great thing about them is that they can stay in the ground throughout the winter, and if you can keep them covered. I've done videos on winter carrots, check those out if you haven't seen them. But a carrot is great because it's all about storing it in the ground if your climate can handle it. And if you can't, you can do it as a storage crop and sit on it for months in a walk-in cooler, but you can actually store carrots in the ground. The best way to do it is to have your last planting date, at least whatever the date to maturity is, to get to maturity before it gets cold. So for me, it's the 1st or 2nd week of August. That's my last planting of carrots, and then those carrots will be mature by mid-October. We'll then cover them, and we'll even go and take the greens off them sometimes, and then maybe put a thermal blanket like a Agribon or Rime over top of them, and then harvest them throughout the winter so you can keep having something to harvest. You got to be able to pull them out of the ground when the ground is thawed. That's really important. And in my video on winter carrots, I get into that further. Number 4, and this one, none of these are necessarily in order of profitability. They're just in order of what I've seen works best. So number 4 is microgreens. Now, to do microgreens, you gotta have some infrastructure, right? You don't need to have a super fancy greenhouse like mine, but you gotta have something. And I did microgreens even in the kitchen of this house here during a time where I was transitioning, and I had a simple shelving unit. I actually detail all that stuff in my book and show the materials that I use. But, you know, just to have some microgreens, you don't have to sell a ton, maybe a couple $100s a week. It still adds up when you put it together with all these other crops. So microgreens are a big one. I got lots of videos on microgreens. Use the search. I tag all my videos accordingly, so if you use the search, you'll find more stuff on microgreens. And number 5 is kind of 3 crops. Well, could be a bunch more, but it's really about having a storage crop. So in my 3rd and 4th year of farming, we did a lot of storage crops. My favorite storage crop was a storage onion called the red wing onion. And we would grow a lot of it to be mature by the early fall, pull them all out of the ground, cure them, and red wing is an onion that can almost last 2 years in good storage. So if you've got a cool, dark, and dry place to store those onions, they can last a really long time. But you can also do the same thing with other storage crops, like beets can be a decent storage crop, onion, like any other type of onion, but particularly, you know, the thick dry skin ones that you can cure and store. Like shallots really did well for that, and garlic is another good one. So with those 5 things, so spinach, kale, carrots, some microgreen production in an indoor area, and then some kind of storage crop, with those 5 crops, you've got a lot of options on what you can market. So let's kind of take you through what that process looks like. So the thing that's a fundamental thing that's important to understand when you're thinking about a live crop that you want to keep in the ground throughout the winter. It might be in a greenhouse like this. It could be in a caterpillar tunnel, or it could be under poly-low tunnels. It could be under agribon. It doesn't matter so much, but the thing that's important to understand is that things don't regenerate in the same way in the winter as they do in the summer. So this is, again, assuming that you live in a place that has a relatively cold climate and you have a proper winter. So spinach, these beds of spinach here, going into winter, I want to have a bunch ready at once, and then I want to be harvesting off those, assuming that I'm not going to get a second cut. So in the summertime, I'm going to continuously plant things because they're going to be ready quickly, and then they're going to be out of the ground, and I'm going to replant them. Or they're going to regenerate quickly, and then I'm going to second, third, sometimes fourth cut off them, especially with greens like these. And so I don't really need to strategically think about how much I need to have in the ground. Whereas in the winter, my general rule of thumb is create a budget for yourself on how much you want to harvest per week. So you might say, I want to harvest 1 50-foot bed of spinach per week for a certain period. And so you might say, so for me, for example, I'll go, so things really stop growing by the end of November. Like, even if I can keep this greenhouse relatively warm, and say the caterpillar tunnels, where they'll be above freezing during the day, things aren't really going to grow. I want to get them to maturity and then let them sit there. And so I want to count how many weeks I've got. So let's just say December, January, and the 2 weeks in February, that is 10 weeks where nothing's really going to grow. It might vary slowly and incrementally, but just bank on not. So you might say, okay, if I want to harvest 1 50-foot bed of spinach for 10 weeks, I need to have 10 beds mature, fully ready to go by the time it gets really cold. So say by that last week of November, I want to have 10 beds in greenhouses or caterpillar tunnels or wherever that are fully mature and ready to harvest, so that I can go and harvest one of those beds every week. And then you know what might happen is you might be pleasantly surprised that by the time you get to week 8, you might have a second cut on the first bed of spinach you harvested. But it totally depends on your climate, the kind of weather you've had. There's so many variables there. But what I do is I bank on not getting a second cut, and I budget according to just getting 1 cut from those beds. So it's the same thing for everything. That's the principle. With carrots, it's the same thing. Okay, I want to harvest 1 bed a week for this period of time. Okay, I need to have this many beds there to get throughout the season. And you might even budget more in the case of carrots, because you might say, well, there's going to be periods of time where I can't harvest, so I might harvest 2 or 3 weeks of carrots at once and then sit on those during the really, really cold months, where I know even if those carrots are under a caterpillar tunnel, I can't go out and chisel them out of the ground. That's just not going to work. So with carrots, you might think about it that way. Kale, same thing. How many beds do I want to have where I can harvest them for a period of time? The nice thing about kale too, similar to carrots, is that it can store. So you might say, okay, I'm going to have 10 beds of kale fully mature with big amounts of foliage on them, and I might go out and harvest 2 weeks at a time, just in case you get these really cold snaps. Because what happens with green kale is it'll kind of droop down when it's really cold, but as soon as it warms back up, it'll kind of spruce up again. And I find kale during that time of the year also has really good shelf life, because it's so hardy and it's survive. I don't know what the reason is. I'm going to try to explain it, but I find that it holds well. Like, you can harvest kale, it can last 2 weeks, so you can kind of look at the forecast and think ahead. And that's an important thing to mention there too, is during the winter time, you really got to look at the calendar. I mean, let's be honest, all farmers are looking at the forecast all the time and thinking ahead. But it's really important in the winter, because you might be mid-January and you say, hey, you know what, we got a warm week coming up here. that might be a good opportunity to go out and harvest a bunch of stuff and sit on it for 2 weeks. Or you might say, we got a really cold spell coming up, let's get a bunch of stuff out of the ground now so that we aren't stuck when it's really cold not being able to harvest anything. It's really that thinking ahead and looking at the forecast and then choosing times on your calendar to be very precise about what you're going to do. So, and you know, with the onions, it's a different thing. You know, you pretty much can just plant as much as you want and harvest them all, cure them, and it's just something extra to sell. So if you've got like 5 things like that, you can fill up a farmer's market table during the winter. Because even with the microgreens, which we haven't talked about too much yet in this video, you can have some variety in there. So I did winter farmers markets for 3 seasons in a row, and I had a variety of microgreens on my table. I had spinach, I had bags of kale. I even was able to push the salad mixes kind of close to Christmas, but then there'd be that really cold period where I wouldn't have anything. But then I'd have some storage onions or some garlic. You know, you can fill a table out and have a good amount of variety. And often for small farms, if you're going on some storage crops and some microgreens, you might only pursue a farmer's market during that time because you probably don't have enough production or enough stuff in storage to fulfill the big restaurant orders or the big grocery store orders. So you might just say, you know what, we're gonna do 1 farmer's market a week. It's easy in the winter because there's not a lot of processing, post-harvest stuff and washing. It's like a few products, and then you got some storage crops, and then you got your microgreens in the greenhouse. You might just say, let's just do a farmer's market. It's some cash money we can get during the winter, and it's a relatively easy thing to do. Whereas, you know, farmers markets in the summer, when you've got with your CSA and your restaurants and all that stuff, can be a lot of work. But you might say, oh, let's sign up to a winter farmers market to move this product throughout the winter. So regarding the microgreens, I've done quite a few videos on microgreens. Even the videos that don't have the title with microgreens in them, I tag them in the videos. So if you search my videos and you put microgreens, you'll get all kinds of stuff on that. And I've talked a lot about these crops before. My 3 biggest ones are sunflower, pea shoots, and radish shoots down here. And so those sometimes you can mix together, you can make different types of products with them. But if you're servicing a community that likes local product, you can often sell more microgreens in the winter than you do in the summer. Because there's a lack of other fresh products available, people will get really jazzed up about microgreens during that period. And that's actually a great time to just scale up that production and start marketing them more, because there's sort of a hole in the market from other products. So I hope you guys have found that helpful. I'm just trying to think of more ways that I can help you guys get your winter season really strong, because winter farming isn't that hard to do. It just requires some planning and some infrastructure, really. But it's relatively easy work because you're not out there prepping beds and planting and doing all the turnover like you are in the main season. It's kind of just get a stock of stuff going and harvest on it throughout the winter. So hope you guys found it helpful. If you want to see more stuff like this, please hit the subscribe button right now and leave your questions and comments below. And if you have any specific questions you want me to answer, first check the search and then leave a comment below, and the comment that has the most amount of likes, I'll make my next video on. All right guys, talk to you later.